I'm not the type to mess around with dark web stuff. Honestly, I was always a bit of a coward when it came to that side of the internet. I'd heard all the stories, the creepy auctions, the murder-for-hire ads, the conspiracy forums. But after everything that happened, I kind of wish I'd stayed away. I wish I'd never even heard of it. It started with a friend, or at least someone I thought was a friend. His name was Ben, and he'd always been into some shady stuff. I didn't ask questions. He had a thing for the weird, the macabre, and the dangerous. That's just who he was. When he hit me up one night, telling me about this mystery box trend on the dark web, I laughed it off. I mean, who the hell pays to have a box of random junk sent to their house? But Ben was different. He didn't just laugh it off like me. He said he ordered one. He wouldn't shut up about it either. Kept talking about how it was going to be life-changing. I didn't think anything of it until the day that box showed up on my doorstep. I didn't order it. I never gave Ben my address. But there it was, a plain, brown cardboard box with no return address. My name was scribbled across the top in some kind of sloppy handwriting, almost like it had been done in a hurry. At first, I thought Ben was just screwing with me. The whole thing felt like some elaborate prank, so I called him. No answer. I shot him a text. Nothing. It wasn't until I started opening the box that I realized this was something far worse than a prank. The smell hit me first. It was rotten. Like a dead animal had been sitting in the sun for days, festering. My stomach churned, and I almost backed off, but I had to know. My hands were trembling as I tore through the tape. What was inside didn't make sense, at least not at first. The box was packed with random objects, all of them strange in their own way. There was a doll's head, just the head, no body, with its eyes gouged out and red paint smeared across its face like blood. Beneath that, there was a rusted hunting knife, old and dull but stained with something dark. It looked like blood. And the most disturbing part was this thing wrapped in a dirty cloth. I unwrapped it and found what looked like a finger, a severed human finger. It was real. The skin was greyish, dried out, and there was no mistaking it. I dropped it immediately, feeling bile rise in my throat. I wanted to scream, but my throat tightened. Instead, I backed away from the box, my heart racing. My mind was screaming at me to call the cops, but something in me just froze. I knew this was something way worse than just some creepy joke. I knew I was in over my head. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the box, the smell, the finger. What the hell had Ben gotten me into? The next day, I tried reaching him again, but it was like he'd vanished off the face of the earth. His phone went straight to voicemail, and none of his friends had seen him. The thing that really got to me, though, was that the box hadn't just appeared. It felt like it was meant for me. I kept wondering if someone was watching me, waiting to see how I'd react. Every creak in my apartment made my skin crawl. I was on edge constantly, like something bad was about to happen. Then, the nightmares started. They weren't your typical bad dreams either. They were vivid, twisted things that felt like they were seeping into my waking life. In one, I saw Ben tied to a chair in a dark, damp basement. His face was pale, eyes wide with terror, as a shadowy figure moved toward him with the same rusted knife from the box. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. But it didn't stop there. The dream started getting worse. I kept seeing that severed finger, only now it wasn't just sitting in the box, it was attached to someone. In one dream, I watched as a man screamed in agony while his finger was sliced off, slowly, deliberately, like whoever was doing it wanted him to suffer. I could hear every crunch of bone, every tear of flesh, like it was happening right in front of me. I woke up gasping for air, the sound of his scream still ringing in my ears. A few nights later, I woke up to a noise coming from the living room. At first I thought I was still dreaming, but then I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it was going to explode out of my chest. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a lamp, and crept toward the noise. When I reached the living room, the sight made my blood run cold. The box, the one I had thrown away, was sitting in the middle of the floor, wide open, and the contents were scattered everywhere. The doll's head was placed carefully on my couch, staring right at me, those hollow eye sockets almost mocking me. The knife was laid out on my coffee table and the finger. It was sitting on the floor, right where I had been standing moments before. That was the last straw. I grabbed the box, shoved everything back inside, and drove straight to the nearest dumpster. I didn't care what time it was. I just needed it gone. But even as I watched the box disappear into the darkness of the dumpster, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. I didn't know what that box was or why it had come to me, but I knew one thing for sure. It had already started tearing apart my life. And deep down, I had this sickening feeling that it was only going to get worse. Ben was still missing. My nightmares weren't stopping, and I knew, without a doubt, that the box had destroyed any chance I had at normalcy. What I didn't know was how much more it was going to destroy. After dumping the box, I thought it'd be over. I kept telling myself it was just some sick prank, a fluke, that somehow someone had gotten my address. Maybe it was Ben. Maybe he was screwing with me, getting some twisted thrill out of watching me lose my mind. But that wasn't it. Deep down, I knew that. It wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. I went back to my apartment, feeling like I had finally rid myself of the nightmare, but I couldn't shake this creeping paranoia. It felt like something was watching me, lingering in the shadows. I started double-checking the locks on my doors, closing the curtains at night, and even setting up some cheap security cameras. Every little sound made me jump. It wasn't just anxiety anymore. It was like something evil had crawled into my life, and it wasn't going to leave. Days passed, and I still hadn't heard from Ben. It was like he vanished off the face of the earth. His phone stayed off, and none of his friends had any idea where he was. He didn't have family nearby, and I wasn't exactly close enough to his parents to just show up at their doorstep asking questions. It's not like we were best friends or anything. He was more like a drinking buddy, someone I hung out with when I didn't feel like being alone. But now, it felt like I was the only person even remotely connected to him. The only one who knew something was wrong. It was around the fourth night after I'd tossed the box that things took a turn for the worse. I was sitting on the couch, trying to distract myself with TV, but I couldn't focus. Every noise outside made me jump. I kept glancing at my phone, hoping for some kind of update on Ben. That's when the knock came at the door. It wasn't loud, just 3 soft knocks, barely audible, but it was enough to freeze me in place. For a few seconds I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at the door like it was about to burst open. Then, the knock came again, this time louder, more insistent. I forced myself to stand up, my legs trembling beneath me. I walked toward the door, every step feeling heavier than the last. My mind was racing. Who the hell would be knocking at this hour? No one ever came over unannounced, especially not this late. When I reached the door, I hesitated, pressing my ear against it to listen. Nothing, just silence. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop. No one was there. I stepped out into the hallway, looking left, then right. Empty. Just the flickering light above me, casting eerie shadows along the walls. I was about to head back inside when something caught my eye, something lying on the floor right in front of my door. It was a box, not the same box. This one was smaller, wrapped in black paper with a red ribbon tied around it. My blood ran cold. My first instinct was to slam the door shut and lock myself inside, but instead I knelt down, staring at the box like it was some kind of ticking bomb. I didn't want to touch it, I didn't want anything to do with it, but I knew, deep down, that it wasn't going away. Whatever was happening, I was in it now. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. The paper was smooth, almost too smooth, and the ribbon looked like it had been tied with precision, like someone took their time making it perfect. I carried it inside, closed the door behind me, and sat down on the couch, the box in my lap. I don't know what I was expecting. Part of me hoped it was just some kind of sick joke, but the rational part of my brain knew better. I untied the ribbon, slowly, hands shaking, and peeled away the black paper. Inside was a small wooden box, polished with a latch keeping it shut. For a moment I just stared at it, my stomach churning with dread. Something was telling me not to open it. Something deep inside, like an instinct. But I didn't listen. I had to know. I flipped the latch and lifted the lid. Inside, there was a piece of paper, folded neatly. I picked it up, unfolding it, my heart racing. There were only 4 words written on it, in the same sloppy handwriting I'd seen on the original box. "Where is your family?" My throat went dry. I stared at the words, trying to make sense of it. Where was my family? What did that mean? My parents were out of state, and I hadn't seen them in a while. My sister lived across town. None of them had anything to do with this, right? But that creeping feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I was still clutching the note when my phone buzzed. I almost dropped it, my hands were so shaky. The screen lit up with a new message from Ben. My heart skipped a beat. Finally, some kind of answer. But when I opened the message, all it said was, "They're coming for them." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. Before I could even process what that meant, another message came through. "It's too late." I shot up from the couch, dialing his number, but it went straight to voicemail again. Panic gripped me, tightening around my chest. My hands were slick with sweat as I tried calling my sister. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I called my parents. Same result. The silence on the other end of the line was like a weight pressing down on me. I could feel the walls closing in. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw on my jacket and rushed out the door. My mind was racing, thoughts crashing into each other. The box, the note, Ben's cryptic messages. What the hell was happening? I sped through the city, barely stopping at lights. The whole drive, my mind was running wild. I tried calling my sister again. Nothing. I tried my parents. Nothing. I could feel the panic rising, choking me. I was thinking the worst. Car accidents, home invasions. I didn't know. I just knew I had to get to them. I had to make sure they were okay. When I finally pulled up outside my sister's apartment, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. Her car was in the driveway, but all the lights were off inside. The whole building was eerily quiet. I banged on the door, calling her name, my voice echoing down the empty hallway. No response. I kept banging until my fists hurt. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first, that same sickly sweet stench from the box. My stomach turned. I called out to her again, my voice shaking. Nothing. As I made my way through the apartment, my heart pounded in my ears. Every step felt heavier than the last, like I was walking into something terrible. The living room was empty, the kitchen too. But when I reached her bedroom, the door was cracked open, just enough for me to see inside. The sight stopped me dead in my tracks. My sister was lying on the floor, face down, completely still. Blood pooled around her head, soaking into the carpet. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the ground, the world spinning around me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at her body, frozen in shock. And that's when I saw it. In her hand, clutched tightly like she'd been holding on for dear life, was a small black box with a red ribbon tied around it. I don't know how long I sat there staring at my sister's body. Time felt like it stopped. My mind was numb, like my brain was trying to protect itself from the horror in front of me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I was frozen, paralyzed by the sickening reality that my sister was dead, and that goddamn box was clutched in her hand, like some twisted calling card. I forced myself to move. My body felt heavy, my limbs like lead as I crawled closer to her. The smell in the room was unbearable, a mix of rot and something metallic, like copper. I could feel bile rising in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I had to get closer. I had to see for myself. When I reached her, I gently pried the box from her fingers. Her skin was cold, stiff. My hands were shaking so bad I thought I'd drop it, but I managed to open the small black box. Inside, there was another note, folded neatly, just like the one I'd found before. My heart pounded as I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the familiar, sloppy handwriting. "You should have answered sooner." I stared at the words, my mind racing. Answered? What the hell were they talking about? I felt a rush of anger, this deep, boiling rage rising up from the pit of my stomach. I wanted to scream, to tear the room apart, to find whoever was responsible for this. But I was helpless, trapped in this nightmare with no way out. My phone buzzed again and I almost didn't want to look. But I knew I had to. The message was from Ben. "It's not over." My hands were shaking so bad that I nearly dropped the phone. I wanted to throw it across the room, to destroy it, but instead I dialed his number. Straight to voicemail again. My throat tightened. My vision blurred with anger and fear. I should have called the police. I should have done something, anything. But instead I sat there, alone in that dark apartment next to my dead sister, staring at that note like it had all the answers. I knew this wasn't just some random act of violence. This was personal. They were targeting my family. First the box, now this. And if I didn't stop it, I knew it wouldn't end here. I barely remember leaving my sister's apartment. The next thing I knew, I was in my car, speeding down the highway. I wasn't thinking straight. I had no plan. All I knew was that my parents were next, and I had to get to them before it was too late. The whole drive, my mind kept replaying the image of my sister lying on the floor, that black box in her hand. It was all connected. The box, Ben, the dark web, whatever this was, it was hunting me, tearing my life apart piece by piece. And I was powerless to stop it. I tried calling my parents again, but their phones went straight to voicemail. Panic gripped me tighter with every mile, my chest feeling like it was being crushed. What if I was too late? What if I was driving toward another nightmare? My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white.
When I pulled up to my parents' house, the driveway was empty. No cars, no lights. The house looked abandoned, almost as if no one had been there in days. I bolted out of the car, heart racing, and sprinted toward the front door. It was locked. I pounded on it, yelling for them, but there was no response. I circled around the back, desperate, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I reached the back door, I noticed something. Scratches. Deep, jagged scratches running along the frame, like someone had tried to claw their way in. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to go inside, but I had to. I found a loose window, pried it open, and climbed through. The house was dead silent. I moved through each room, my heart pounding louder with every step. My parents weren't in the living room. They weren't in the kitchen either. The house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Every creak of the floorboards made my skin crawl. I kept calling out for them, but only my own voice echoed back. That's when I saw the basement door. It was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness spilling out into the hallway. We never went down there. The basement was mostly for storage, old furniture, junk, stuff my parents never got around to throwing out. But now, there was this strange pull, like whatever I was looking for was down there, waiting for me. I stepped toward the door, my hand trembling as I pushed it open wider. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The further down I went, the colder it got, like the air itself was suffocating me. The smell hit me halfway down, metallic, like blood. I knew that smell all too well by now. At the bottom of the stairs, I fumbled for the light switch. My fingers found it, but when I flicked it on, the bulb overhead barely flickered to life. The dim light cast long, distorted shadows across the room, and then I saw them. My parents were tied to chairs in the middle of the basement, their heads slumped forward, their bodies limp. Blood covered the floor beneath them, pooling around their feet. I rushed forward, a scream tearing from my throat. I dropped to my knees in front of my mom, grabbing her shoulders, shaking her. "Mom! Dad! Please, wake up!"
But they didn't move. Their skin was pale, their bodies cold. My hands were soaked in their blood, trembling as I checked for a pulse. Nothing. I choked on a sob, my whole body shaking as the reality of it crashed down on me. They were dead, and then I saw it. Sitting between them on the floor was another box, smaller than the others but unmistakable. A black box with a red ribbon tied around it, just like before. My stomach turned, but I couldn't stop myself. I reached for it, my fingers trembling as I pulled the ribbon loose and opened it. Inside there was a small envelope. My name was scrawled across the front in that same familiar handwriting. My heart pounded in my chest as I ripped it open, pulling out the note inside. "We warned you. You didn't listen. Now it's your turn." Before I could even process the words, I heard something behind me. The sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, like someone was taking their time coming down the stairs. My blood ran cold. I spun around, my heart racing, but I couldn't see anyone. The dim light flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls, but the basement was empty. Or at least, it looked empty. The footsteps continued, getting closer, but there was no one there. I backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind spinning. The shadows on the walls seemed to move, to stretch and twist, like they were alive. I could feel something, someone, watching me. My skin prickled with fear. I was no longer alone. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. I nearly dropped it, fumbling to pull it from my pocket. A message flashed across the screen. It was from Ben again. "Look up!" I froze. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Slowly, I lifted my gaze to the ceiling, and that's when I saw it. Dangling from the ceiling, directly above my parents' bodies, was a figure. It was barely visible in the dim light, its form twisted and wrong. Its limbs were too long, its face obscured by shadows. It hung there, silently swaying, watching me. Its eyes, God, those eyes. They were glowing, faintly, like two burning coals staring into my soul.
I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there, paralyzed with terror as the thing slowly descended, its long, spindly arms reaching out toward me. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged, sharp teeth. A low, guttural growl echoed through the basement, vibrating through the floor and into my bones. I backed up, stumbling over my own feet, my breath coming in short, frantic bursts. The thing was getting closer, its claws inches from my face. I scrambled to the stairs, nearly tripping in my panic. I could feel it behind me, its breath hot on the back of my neck, but I didn't dare look back. I ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get the lock to click into place. I could still hear it down there, scratching at the door, growling like it was waiting for me to come back. I knew it wasn't over. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to stop. It had already taken my family, and now it was coming for me. I collapsed on the floor, my back against the door, sobbing. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Ben. There's no escape. I don't remember how long I sat there, slumped against the basement door, trying to make sense of everything. My parents were dead, my sister was dead, and now there was this thing hunting me. The weight of it crushed me. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of fear, guilt, and confusion. My mind was a mess, spiraling in 1,000 directions. The messages from Ben kept replaying in my head. There's no escape. I knew he was right. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to stop until it had me too. After a while, I managed to pull myself off the floor. My legs were shaky, barely able to hold me up, but I needed to move. I couldn't stay in the house, not with that thing in the basement. My whole body was screaming at me to run, to get as far away as possible, but where could I go? I couldn't outrun this. I couldn't hide from it. I staggered into the kitchen, hands trembling as I grabbed my phone again. I didn't know what to do, who to call. The cops. What the hell was I going to tell them? Hey, officer, there's a monster in my basement and it killed my family because I opened a box from the dark web. Yeah, that'd go over real well. They'd throw me in a padded room before I could finish my sentence, but I had to do something, anything. I tried calling Ben one last time, Voicemail. I screamed into the phone, my voice cracking with desperation. Ben, you bastard! What the hell did you do? Why is this happening? I hung up, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. My head was spinning, my chest tight. I was out of options. That's when I noticed it, another box. Sitting on the kitchen counter, wrapped in that familiar black paper with the red ribbon. I hadn't even heard anyone come in. My heart dropped into my stomach. The air around me seemed to freeze, the temperature in the room dropping so fast I could see my breath. I didn't want to open it, but I knew I had no choice. This was it, the final message. With trembling hands, I untied the ribbon and peeled back the paper. Inside was a small black velvet pouch. I stared at it for a long time, dread gnawing at my insides. Finally, I tipped the pouch upside down and something heavy fell into my palm. It was a ring, not just any ring though. This thing was old, ancient even. The metal was tarnished, almost black, with strange symbols etched into it that I didn't recognize. It felt wrong, like it was pulsing in my hand, almost alive. As soon as I touched it, my vision blurred, and a wave of nausea crashed over me. I stumbled back, dropping the ring onto the counter. Another note was tucked inside the pouch. I already knew what it was going to say before I opened it. The same sloppy handwriting, the same message. Put it on. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands shaking violently as I stared at the ring. There was no way I was putting that thing on, no way in hell. But then, the scratching at the basement door started again, slow, deliberate, like claws scraping against the wood. My entire body tensed, every instinct telling me to run. But where? That thing was still down there, waiting, getting closer. I could hear its low growl, vibrating through the floor. Put it on. The words echoed in my mind. I grabbed the ring, my fingers trembling as I stared at it. I didn't want to do this. I didn't know what would happen if I did. But I was running out of time. The scratching was getting louder, more frantic. I could feel it. Whatever was in the basement, it was trying to break through. My throat tightened as I slipped the ring onto my finger. The moment it touched my skin, I felt it. This surge of cold, this icy energy shooting up my arm and spreading through my entire body. I gasped, stumbling back as the room around me seemed to warp and shift. The walls twisted, the floor buckled beneath me, and suddenly I was standing in a completely different place. I was no longer in my house. I was somewhere else. The world around me was dark, like the sky was permanently stuck in twilight. The ground beneath my feet was dry and cracked, like a desert, but there was no wind, no sound, just a deafening silence that pressed in from all sides. I turned in circles, my heart racing, trying to figure out where the hell I was. And then I saw it. In the distance, there was a figure standing at the edge of the horizon. Tall, with long, twisted limbs and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. My stomach dropped. It was the same thing from the basement, the creature. But now, it was standing upright, watching me from afar. It didn't move. It didn't need to. I could feel its presence, like this heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on me. Before I could even react, a voice whispered in my ear, "You belong to me now." I whipped around, but no one was there. The voice was deep, guttural, like it was coming from all directions at once. My heart pounded in my chest, fear clawing at my throat. I didn't know where I was or how I had gotten here, but I knew one thing for sure: I was no longer in control. The ground beneath me shifted, and I stumbled forward, trying to regain my balance. My vision blurred, the world around me spinning. It was like the ring was pulling me somewhere, dragging me deeper into this nightmare. I tried to take the ring off, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it had fused with my skin, like it was a part of me now. I screamed, tugging at it, but it was no use. The voice came again, louder this time, echoing in my mind. "You should have never opened the box." The figure in the distance started to move, slowly at first, but then faster, its long limbs twisting and contorting as it sprinted toward me. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't move. I couldn't run. All I could do was watch as it got closer and closer, its glowing eyes locked on mine. And then, just as it was about to reach me, everything went black. I woke up on the kitchen floor, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The ring was gone. The box was gone. The scratching at the basement door had stopped, but I knew, deep down, it wasn't over. Because now, I could hear them. The whispers, faint at first, but getting louder with each passing second. Voices, all around me, coming from the walls, the floor, the air. And they were all saying the same thing. "You're next." I thought it was over. When I woke up on the kitchen floor, the silence was so thick it almost felt comforting. The scratching had stopped, the box was gone, and the ring had disappeared from my finger. But even as I lay there, gasping for air, trying to convince myself that it was over, I could still hear them, the whispers, growing louder, clearer.
They were inside my head. At first I tried to ignore them. I locked myself in the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, stared at my reflection, hoping that I'd wake up from this nightmare. But the whispers didn't stop. They never stopped. It was like they were alive, crawling inside my skull, feeding on my fear. I could feel them, burrowing deeper, pulling me towards something dark, something I couldn't understand. I knew I had to leave the house. I didn't care where I went. I just knew I couldn't stay there. The air was too thick with the weight of everything that had happened. My sister's blood on the carpet, my parents' lifeless bodies in the basement. It was too much. But when I opened the front door, I was met with something worse. The world outside was wrong. It wasn't my neighborhood anymore. The streets were empty. The sky was this deep, unnatural shade of red, and everything was bathed in a sickly glow. It looked like the world had bled dry. My car was still there, but the trees, the houses, they were all twisted, distorted, like something had pulled reality apart and stitched it back together wrong. I stepped outside, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. They were angry. I felt like I was being watched from every angle, like invisible eyes were tracking my every move. I stumbled toward my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, I floored it, speeding down the street. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. But no matter how far I drove, the landscape didn't change. It was the same twisted nightmare over and over. Red skies, empty streets, and that goddamn oppressive silence. After what felt like hours, I stopped in the middle of the road, slamming my fists against the steering wheel, screaming at the top of my lungs. The whispers were deafening now, so loud that it felt like they were tearing my mind apart. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what they wanted. And that's when I saw it. In the middle of the road, standing perfectly still, was a figure. At first I thought it was human, but as I got closer, I realized how wrong I was. Its limbs were too long, its face too pale, and its eyes, those glowing red eyes, bored into me like they could see straight through my soul. It was the thing from the basement, the thing that had been hunting me all along.
I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop just inches from the figure. It didn't flinch. It just stood there, staring at me, waiting. I didn't want to get out of the car, but something was pulling me toward it. My hands were shaking as I opened the door and stepped out into the street. The whispers quieted, but they were still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for me to make my next move. The figure tilted its head, watching me with those empty, glowing eyes. And then it spoke. "You let them in." Its voice was like nails on a chalkboard, grating and sharp, cutting through the air. My stomach twisted, and I stumbled back, my mind racing. Let them in? What the hell was it talking about? I tried to speak, but no words came out. My throat was dry, my mouth useless. The figure took a step closer, its movements unnatural, like it was fighting against gravity. It reached out a long, spindly arm, pointing at me with a finger that seemed to stretch endlessly. The box, the ring, It was never meant for you. But you opened it. You invited us in. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. I hadn't just been a victim. I had caused this. By opening the box, by putting on the ring, I had unleashed something far worse than I could have ever imagined. And now, it was too late to stop it. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest, but the figure was relentless. It moved closer, its presence suffocating, filling the air with this cold, dead weight. Your family paid the price. Now it's your turn. I felt my knees buckle, collapsing onto the pavement. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. The whispers in my head were louder than ever, swirling around me, twisting my thoughts, filling me with this overwhelming sense of dread. The figure leaned down, its face inches from mine, those glowing eyes burning into my skull. You should have left it alone. And then, it touched me. The moment its cold, twisted fingers made contact with my skin, my world exploded into darkness. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything was pain. I felt my body being ripped apart, piece by piece, as the whispers screamed in my head, louder and louder until they were all I could hear. I was drowning in them, suffocating under the weight of their rage. When the darkness finally cleared, I wasn't in the street anymore. I was back in my parents' house, standing in the living room, but everything was different. The furniture was gone, the walls were rotting, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. And then I saw them. My family, my sister, my mom, my dad, all of them standing in a circle around me. Their eyes were hollow, empty, and their bodies were twisted, broken. But they were alive, or something close to it. They stared at me, silent, waiting. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My mouth wouldn't open. My body wouldn't move. And then I realized what had happened. I wasn't alive anymore. I had become part of the nightmare. Trapped, just like them. Forever bound to the box, the ring, and the thing that had taken everything from me. The whispers were no longer just in my head. They were all around me, speaking through the mouths of my dead family, repeating the same words over and over. You're one of us now. And there was no escape.